I'm Faz Shakir.
I'm Amanda Litman, and this is Battleground. Faz is still gone this week, spending time with his very cute new baby. Our guest this week is Tiana Epps-Johnson. Tiana is the founder and executive director of the Center for Tech and Civic Life. Tiana Epps-Johnson, welcome to Battleground.
Hi, Amanda. So excited to be here.
I am so glad to have you because your work covers one of my favorite topics, which is the ways in which the giant structures and institutions within which we're all working and living are deeply broken. deeply broken. So let's do some quick, defining the terms here. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, I like to think about it as lots of opportunity for improvement. I'm the founder and executive director at the Center for Tech and Civic Life, and we are a national nonprofit that works across the country to support local election departments, those folks that are really on the front lines of how we experience voting, build their capacity, their skills, the tools that they have to do their work, and actually the resources, the actual funding that they have to make it happen so that we might have elections that are secure, that really build your trust and confidence. There is a lot of work to do to actually make our voting process work in a way where your access to democracy isn't dependent on your zip code.
Yeah, I think we think about elections and voting as sort of like the candidates and then the voting rights laws and the sort of the ads that we see on TV. And most people don't really think about the mechanics of actually showing up, casting your ballot, having it be counted, and fulfilling the mechanics of voting. Can you explain a little bit about how elections are funded in the United States?
In most countries, there is a centralized voting authority at usually like the federal national level that makes decisions and helps to run and make sure that elections are administered so that the logistics work, so that they're secure, all of the things that are like polling places, storage, all of the just back end parts of the actual voting process happen. In the US, we don't have a centralized voting authority. Instead, we have about 8,000 election departments, a really bottom-up system that are in communities across the country. And each one of those 8,000 local election departments, usually at the city or county level, have a tremendous amount of independent responsibility over our actual voting experience. Those local election departments are doing things like making sure that there are enough polling places for voters to cast ballots at, and doing the work to actually equip those polling places with staff and equipment and the things that are required for the voting process to actually work. Those election departments are responsible for maintaining critical systems that are on the back end, like our databases, where information about voter registration and other things are stored. And so those folks really have a direct role in defending our democracy from hostile foreign attack. These election departments, are just doing year-round work to engage and support voters. And because it's a really localized structure, your question about funding really follows. So much like schools, elections are funded, or the actual administration of elections are funded primarily at the local level. And then there's also funding that comes from the state and federal level. And what that means when elections are funded at the local level is that the budget that an election department has to actually deliver democracy can be wildly disparate depending on the resources that that local community has. So, for example, if you're in a community that has a relatively impoverished tax base, it probably follows that your election department funding follows that, and that you might have fewer resources to have enough polling places or to inform voters about how the process works or to keep the process secure than even your community next door. And we've really seen the data bear that out, where there are election departments that are spending $2 per registered voter to make the process work, and other election departments that are spending over $60 per registered voter. And you can imagine just the disparity in the quality that you might experience if you have that difference in resources.
What does that look like in practice? Like, what does that money buy you?
Yeah, well, let's think about what we would hope to expect when we are engaging as a voter. When we think about an awesome, delightful voter experience, it means that we're being invited to participate as members of the public, that we know when we need to engage, we know the deadlines, we have the information that we need to actually answer information to choose the candidates on our ballot, not just the folks at the top of the ticket, but the folks all the way down the ballot. When election departments don't have those resources, what we see are things like not enough equipment or polling places available, and that results in things like long lines. When election departments don't have resources to do things like communicate, it means that it creates the environment for mis and disinformation to really flourish. And so there are so many things, from the logistics to the information to just the quality of the experience, that really are resource dependent. And we've seen just decades and decades of under and disinvestment in this critical part of our election system, while there is so much more money being poured into the sort of campaign and electoral side, that's really a sort of cycle by cycle investment, but not this deep investment that we need in the long term for this just really fundamental part of our democracy that happens to be crumbling right now because we are not investing in it properly. And most voters in election departments are paying the price.
Is there a couple examples that stand out to you as just like the most egregious crumbling election administration infrastructure?
There are. I think the first thing that we have to recognize is that last year, election departments, against insurmountable odds, against a pandemic, when faced with record turnout in a time that was really challenging for our democracy, were able to come together, to muster the resilience and show up every day to deliver the most secure election that we've ever seen in our history. So that part is true.
Great. Good job all around.
And also, they did it sort of despite what they had available to them to make that happen. Election departments are really, truly working with crumbling, outdated infrastructure, and it's truly a miracle that they were able to make that happen. So 2017, Department of Homeland Security named elections to be critical infrastructure. Some of the most critical infrastructure in the country, there's just a handful of things that are designated critical infrastructure that are so important to protect because of our national security, that we have to just pay close attention to making sure that they are bolstered. And from our perspective, we have to actually follow up with investing in elections like they are critical infrastructure. And we haven't so far. And so what that looks like is, yes, many folks voting on equipment that was purchased before the iPhone was even invented. The vast majority of election departments, according to a survey that the AP did in 2019, are using systems that rely on Windows 7 or earlier software. Could you imagine doing your work that you do every day on a computer that was running on the systems from 2009? Just think about the everyday inconvenience, let alone the ability to actually deliver democracy, which is what these folks are responsible for doing.
No, I get grumpy if my iPhone is older than 2 years. That is outrageous.
And it's not just the technology that election departments are using. It also are it's the facilities. It's all sorts of things. So last year, we, in the face of this pandemic that was really impacting elections in a significant way, including increasing the cost to administer them because election departments needed things like personal protective equipment and machinery to be able to serve more people by mail. We ended up leading a private funding effort because Congress did not allocate the funds that were required. They just allocated 10% of the $4 billion that election departments actually needed last year to make the process work.
Is there a rationale for that?
You would think that with everything that election departments were facing, that last year would have been, if any moment, the moment that our elected leaders would say, we have your back. And instead, what really happened in practice was election departments, those 8,000 election departments, were sort of left to figure it out on their own. So again, experts estimated it was going to cost maybe $4 billion to administer a safe election. Through the CARES Act, Congress allocated about $400 million.
That's not enough.
Not enough. And, in practice, what that meant was that we heard from election departments that had spent their full budget that they had for the year by the time that they were at their August primary, before they even were able to turn the quarter to November. And that when they got the federal funding, it was really critical, of course. But we heard from election departments and highly scrutinized places across the country that funding only covered a portion of their postage, let alone the rest of the operation. So it wasn't enough. We ended up leading a private philanthropic effort where we ended up raising $350 million and re-granted that to election departments across 49 states and communities all over. Anyone that applied was able to get funds. We have to invest in our elections in a more long-term, more robust way, and we have to do it now.
Thanks for watching. You can get the full episode of Battleground on The Recount streaming daily or listen to it wherever you get your podcasts.